Glow has been a staple way to get an easy epic level in G-Dash for the longest time now. And while our featured top isn't quite filled with the most generic glow you could think of anymore, the style very much so persists as one of the most consistent ways to A. get better at building, and B. land these first creator points. Let's together deconstruct and gain deeper understanding of how Draft Dynamics by Bizarre and the team, one of the best examples of the mature glow we ought to build with nowadays, does it. We'll work in sections. First I'll talk about structures, in turn colors, then block design, backgrounds, air decoration, and lastly color changes and pulses. Each section will have a part where I introduce the topic and give you a rough idea of how we'll be proceeding, and a practical part where we jump into the editor and build a 7-second demo together. Draft Dynamics houses like 3 or 4 different ways to approach glow entirely. Today we're just going to be focusing on one of them. The other ones I might cover as this series of tutorials progresses. Right before we get into the first section, let's just take a brief look at what we're going to be building over the course of this video. Structures. There's a few things we can say about them. First of all, they aren't all that freeform. You might have to think about your decoration as you design your structures. So as you may have noticed, there is a lot of small ones and only a few bigger ones, and that is something we basically have to abide if we're looking to create in this style. Aim is to really fill up space with many of these smaller blocksies. Ground spikes, which extend into the air, will be helping us with that. It's important to notice these glass blocks embedded into some structures. You can introduce them already, or leave that for later. Now then, enjoy this time-lapse of me turning this unstructured layout to a structured one. Feel free to skip if that is not something that interests you. Alrighty, since there's a lot of colors that make up glow, let's explicitly talk about just the most prevalent ones here. There's 3 main colors that we'll constantly care about, and the majority of the rest will ideally just depend on these in some way. I have started with a pink violet-ish color theme. You're free to start with the same ones, or with different ones in similar shades. For a background color, you really have to think about what sort of vibe you want your level to have. In case of Draft Dynamics, it's a really fast-paced, energetic theme, right? I have opted in for a less speedy, more precise and serious-feeling music and gameplay, right? So, following our differences in theming, Draft Dynamics went with a quite bright background, while I have opted in for a rather dark one in comparison. Which will work best for your level? Really up to you. So yes, in my case, the background is set to a really dark, not fully but quite saturated version of our theme color, which is again pink-violet for me at first. We'll be pulsing it into a brighter version of that color periodically, but I'll talk about that further in the pulses section. I have opted in for a pitch black ground color throughout the level. I felt it just works best with the noticeable amount of ground spikes we'll be having. Then we have the object color, which affects all lines in our level by default. Following the very popular purple-orange pair, I've chosen, well, orange for that. No matter the actual color hue you choose, this color should always be either quite or really bright and really washed out, meaning very close to white on the horizontal axis of our color picker. Next up, there's an entire suite of colors that copy the background color at varying brightnesses. These are widely used for a lot of glow elements, the background, and also the air decoration. Since once again my background is quite dark, I needed some of these background copied colors to be really bright. So, most of my other colors which copy background would actually copy color 7, which, as you can see on the screenshot, is my background color already copied with a brightness of 200%. Should your theme be closer to that of Draft Dynamics, where your background is far, far, far brighter than mine, you might just be able to get by with copying the background color without that middleman of color 7 I have introduced. Lastly, I still have color 1 being a separate primary color, even if it most often will just be a different shade of the background color. This one I'll also most often copy and brighten or darken as the need arises. We also have a few secondary colors we can use on details. They copy color 1 and add hue to it. By adding 180 hue to a color, we can naturally arrive at a complementary one, which will always look good next to a primary one. You can also have one which adds 120 hue, and ones that add and subtract 30 hue respectively. These are going to be adjacent colors, which also most often will work really well with our primary color, basically by maths. Now, there's one last color I'd like to touch upon briefly here. It's a lower priority one, but it's still definitely worth mentioning. And that is a dark and saturated copy of the color 1 of our primary color, which is used by 3D lines, the details of 3D lines as well, and as a detail color for subblades. It's especially useful as a distinct color because we are going to be pulsing that value towards a little bit more of a brighter value and then back to a darker one. You can see that as I hover to the left here. This is like a bright pulse, and then here we have a dark pulse. About time we get on with the real stuff. There is 3 main designs we'll learn to realize here. The one for really small blocks, roughly up to 6 by 1. One for middle-sized blocks, roughly up to 6 by 2 or 3. And the one for all blocks larger than that. Notice how all 3 of them are constructed from 2 types of substructures. First, there is the hard surfaces, which have a opaque background. They are dark, but they have bright accents. They use object color for the lines, and they use the aforementioned dark, pulsing color 1 copy for 3D lines. And then the other type being the glass resembling blocks, right? And these are see-through. They use primary color, which is color 1, for both the object color and the 3D line color. That's important. And lastly, the glow, the shadows, and the rest of the details on said glass blocks are to simulate a light being cast from top right towards bottom left. So now you may enjoy this little time lapse of me actually making some blocks from the ground up. Feel free to follow along if that is interesting to you, or, you know, go ahead towards the next part, right? A background should achieve two things. It should, first of all, strengthen and enforce your theme, and secondly, it should complement the feeling of depth your level gets. Both draft dynamics and my demo lean slightly towards tech in their themes. Draft dynamics went with a futuristic, closely undescribable huge blocks, alongside some for smaller ones. I went with structures much closer resembling skyscrapers, alongside a city built in background. Back to the main point. Draft Dynamics' background moves partially independently, like each element of it has a lot of movement, enhancing the snappy and the dynamicness of Draft Dynamics, right? In my case, the background is darker, far more static, leaning towards that precision-focused, serious tone of mine. I move all my buildings at once, applying 0.8 of all camera movements to them. There's so much more that could have been said about backgrounds, however, really, they are one of the most free-form elements of how you interpret the style yourself. They are super case-dependent, and you can just do them in so many different ways, that I think just showing one of them for this general style introduction tutorial should be plenty. I might come back to backgrounds as a topic in an entire video dedicated to them. I'm going to divide this section into three parts. First talking about ground spikes, then talking about air decoration attached to blocks, and only lastly about air decoration that just floats around, seemingly not attached to anything. So let's talk about these ground spikes. There's a few layers to them. First of all, there is the spikes themselves, and they just look like the most default ones you could imagine. Make sure you do use this corner connector. It makes or breaks this literally. Then we have these wooden blocks in abstract shapes on your primary color. Like this. This is just the copy of background. And from there, we also have this tech block as an overlay. And that just brings some more complexity. And this is on color black and some black that has a bit of transparency. And then lastly, we have that glow, which is in a little bit of an abstract shape. And here we use color 1 with altered hue and some more brightness. And also with the other one, which does the exact same thing, but with less hue added. Lastly, we have these little lumps of glow and the spikes, which are really bright because I use 2 of them. And one is on color 1 and the other is on color 1 with less saturation and more brightness. As for things attached to blocks, that's probably the place where you'll want to experiment the most. I went with chains on top of some of my blocks. I made sure to add ground spikes in this specific manner that you can see on the screenshot here. And saw blades, which I have attached to blocks using thin lines with subtle glow. There's many other things you can do here, and I really encourage you to just try to find your own. As for air decoration that's actually floating in the air, you want to make sure you don't use too much. Our style mainly focuses on block design and on the background, and if you need way too much air decoration, you probably just need to fill up more space with either blocks or the ground spikes. That said, sometimes it's still applicable to drop it here and there, with examples being in front of you, like a small circle, like a small diamond, or a creative design of an arrow. And yet again, there is a lot of room to just experiment, so feel free to not copy what I have, but instead come up with something yourself. Major color changes follow the principles we've already established back in the colors section. So either not too bright or a quite dark background color, then either a quite or really bright and a really washed out object color, and this color should be different to the background color, and then lastly, a moderately bright color 1, of the same color as the background, but with slightly more saturation. And a couple of notes on that. First of all, none of these are absolute rules. You may want to sometimes switch that around, for example, change your color 1 into more of a washed out color, and that'll actually look good with your color of the background. Or you may just want to pulse your object color onto bright gray, and honestly that is more than fine oftentimes. Each time I change a background color, I change it to a really dark version of said color, and follow that with a 0.24 brightness pulse, lasting roughly until the next color swap. You can see that as I am kind of moving around my level here. I pulse the object color in a similar manner. Here's the stats. Should your level be more energetic in nature, you might want to apply such a pulse far more often. Just find a nice element of your music to latch onto, and keep it synchronized with that. And with this, we've reached the conclusion. Please remember that you don't have to use this style one-to-one. In fact, I encourage you to switch things around, merge this style with your own, and do things with your own spin. Because this tutorial took a highly specific approach, focusing on quite narrow examples. But I believe that by diving deeply into at least one example in this manner, we can just understand and uncover what works and why it does. This was a 3-week-long project. I'm really glad to have this out, so if you've enjoyed, please subscribe, please like. That's gonna help me reach more people with hopefully the quality content that I am spending a lot of time on to get you the best of the best. Cheers, see you the next time!